I've heard many bad things about, you're a girl, why are you playing soccer, from like bad comments to swearing and a lot of controversial things just because with the reason I'm a girl and because I can't participate in guys, like sports for guys,
It's just meant to be a conversation, so don't be too... I know I say don't be nervous, and you're still going to be super nervous,
yeah.
But I know. But it's not an interview, right? It's just a chat. Okay.
Hopefully I'm decent at being casual. Yeah.
I think you'll be all right. Okay, then let's start, yeah? Okay, thank you so much for joining me. Now, despite your young age, you've already received awards, prizes. You've been winning awards for the National Student Heritage Commentating Contest. You've been recognized by the National Council of Youth Organization in Korea for your work. You've written a book which is going to be published. It kind of blows my mind how much you're doing, what you're doing, because we think, in our stereotypes, children your age are just playing computer games and sitting on sofas and sleeping in late. So how did you start doing what you're doing? Where did this journey begin? Let's try and get into it from the start, Kay.
Okay, wow, that's flattering. Thank you, first of all.
Thank you.
And I do sit around and sleep a lot, but I just to explain a little bit about myself, I am fully Korean and I've gone to Korean school for 8 years now. A lot of people think that's surprising. I don't know why, but and even though I'm going to like international school right now, I lived in America when I was 7, like for a year and a half, which meant that I went to public school in the States. And because I was so young, I didn't even know English or like even the alphabet. So at the time, it was really a struggle, like to the point where my homeroom teacher had to pack my bag for me because I didn't understand what she was saying. So that's really where I started off, very young, and being exposed to like a foreign country at such a young age and going through the experience of like being criticized that my kimchi fried rice lunch is like smelly and I had to eat sandwiches that I don't like for a year. And those experiences kind of had me to feel curious about where I come from and why there are differences between people and why I wasn't used to my culture as well, living in a foreign country in such a young age, even though it was a short period of time. And now like Korea is well known for like to foreign countries because it's music and food and beauty, but that back then it really annoyed me how people didn't know who I identify as. Like people didn't know where Korea was when they're holding a Samsung or LG phone or getting into their Hyundai cars, and that made me really mad, like as a young Korean, that people weren't recognizing our country and our traits for what we have established. And I would be playing in the playground with all these white girls and they would come up to me and they're like, I don't want to play with a Chinese girl. And I think it's able to generalize to every Korean or like Asian girl, like children living abroad in a young age, being hurt by these like, comments from people. And at the same time, what struck me as like an individual more was that I have come back to Korea and my classmates would consider me foreign when I was considered Asian and being discriminated abroad. So a lot of, criticism and it's weird for being able to speak better like English than them. To some people, and that was what I was also criticized as, and a lot of mix between like a lot of conflicts, and that really went to questioning what Korea is and what Korean culture is and history is like as a Korean, and what as a Korean that I'm supposed to be doing with those customs, leading to what parts of Korea needs to be more advertised in order to have like an international audience of culture and history. And what I loved and identify as was Korea. So I wanted to know more about that and kind of get into like the general understanding. And I think that's what really led me towards what Korea is, why I need to study Korean history in order to blend in at some times, or maybe to advocate for myself at some times. And yeah, that's where it all started. And I started studying history with, you know, the goal to spread Korea, to be exposed to more of an international community day by day. And I would watch these news, like all over the news, I would hear, oh, President Moon, or like other people, like people who are supposed to be representing our country going abroad in international stages, and they're having like lunch by themselves, or they're not being able to blend out, or, you know, so that was really a big pain for me to watch as a Korean, because I love this country so much. And that's where I kind of started very small by visiting just different historic sites, taking notes and pictures of like every spots or object that I could possibly see to know a little bit more about Korea. And I think I started that on a very experience-based type of studying, instead of like just, you know, reading books all day. And at the age I was too young to read books. So, but just looking up words that I didn't know, whether that was Korean or English, and keeping track of like what I studied, diving into like a deeper factual understanding of historical knowledge. Like, and then after a general understanding, I kind of thought about what I would need to like take on as to like come to the goal of advocating for myself or the country. So I started like coming up ways to explain the historic sites with the knowledge that I have studied. And that included like coming up with like own exhibition route or writing my own scenarios. So yeah, basically I started studying history when I was like in 5th grade, and I started giving tours when I was in 8th grade. So now it's my 5th year giving tours at historic sites to foreigners. Yeah.
It's amazing. What I love about that so much, Kay, is that your desire to increase awareness and spread knowledge of Korea, Korean history, Korean culture, it doesn't come through sort of, you mentioned President Moon and people going abroad, but it comes from personal experience. It comes from a desire. It comes from what you've been through as an individual, rather than like a government office or bureaucrat saying, you know, Korea fighting. And I think it creates different effects, and that's really a cool thing. You mentioned that, you know, some people might have a Samsung phone and or a Hyundai car and not even know it's from Korea. I remember my grandmother, she proudly told her friends before I came here that I was going to South Croatia, and that was she was old. It's okay, she didn't mean bad by it. But do you think that's changed? You know, so you were talking about your early young experiences. Do you think it's, you know, we can't generalize the whole world, but is Korea a bit more known now? Is it a bit cooler to be Korean, or is there still a long way to go on that, do you think?
I mean, a big mix of both. Like throughout the past 10, 20 years, Korea evidently has changed a lot. And I think it's kind of seen like the fame, like, I mean, if you talk about like Korean fame, it's obviously like BTS, you know, Korean food, mukbangs, and, you know, but other than that, just general interest that people have, like, no matter where it's individually originated from, has changed a lot. And I think that can be like seen in, you know, majors that people choose when it comes to like, you know, colleges. Like people, like the rate of people choosing a Korean based study or like Asian studies have been going up in many colleges. And I think, not like you said, it can't be like seen in all over the world. It can't be generalized, but at least it's being seen in just big countries, like for example, America, Canada, England, or, you know, people have been being more focused. And if you just look on like celebrities, Korean celebrities, like comments, you know, half of them are English or languages that I can't understand. And I think I should be proud, and, you know, baby steps will lead to even a bigger progress. So I think I'm very happy of what's been happening of Korea. Yeah,
I agree, and I definitely see it because I teach Korean studies in universities, and the amount of international students coming in, it's really good for me because the classes become popular, but it shows you that it's real, actually. It's not just statistics, or it shows you people actually are becoming more interested in Korea. Now, what's interesting, you mentioned things like BTS and mukbang and aespa and all this, but it's easy to promote Korea through that K culture, the K-pop, the K-dramas, because it's cool and it looks good and it's beautiful. But you do it through history, and that's what I think is the really like interesting part about it. And we normally associate history with being boring or school exams, or most people got history, really? So why history? Why have you chosen to try to spread awareness of Korea through history, Kay?
Okay, I think this kind of leads to my next goal that I have right now.
Okay.
So I think evidently when I was dreaming, when I was little, people have thought that Korea needs to be more popular in the international stage. And I was the only one probably thinking that, which led to those individuals making a difference, which we can see now. But what I really think about Korean history or Korean culture is it's the key to the next progress, the next step in our country to be even more out there in the international world. Because, BTS and mukbang and all these stuff that are being, focused right now, it's just fame. Like, it's a big step and we worked really hard to get here, but it's fame that could eventually at some point decrease and lead to people maybe forgetting it, or maybe like other things like, American celebrities or even pop songs, they can easily take over at some point. And I'm really afraid, and I'm trying to use history and culture as a method for people to kind of see that and have like the continuation of Korean like culture and history being out there and being known to people. And I think the reason why I think history is so interesting and compared to like people like my peers is because I come from, and I approach history in a little bit of a different way, where it's not just facts like written in a book to memorize for exams, but really it's about where we have come from, like as an evidence of human existence. And for me, I drive myself with my goal to achieve a certain level. I mean, I don't know if it's possible, but I'm trying. And sometimes like we can see that through like historic antiquity, and whereas a lot of students approach history for the first time at like school in terms of like education, I approach history by myself, walking in historic sites, going from, description panel to panel, learning all the characteristics and, being scared at times because, the displays were too, pressuring, or sometimes being relaxed because I like the trees in the garden, those individual connections really made me to be more interested in, a smoother segue to learning history itself. And like, for example, before learning about the Japanese colonial era, which is like, a crucial period of Korean history, I studied about the Seodaemun Hyungmuso itself, like the Seodaemun Prison. And instead of turning into like a thick book about all the unethical things that happened during the time, the agony and pain, I went to the prison museum myself and experienced being scared, being afraid to go into all those specific cells and empathizing what people would have felt during the time. And I think that's a little bit different when you just read from a book, and just even reading all the handwritten carved out letters that the independence fighters have written on the cells. Like, if you see those things in historic sites, you cannot not be interested. So I think in those sense, like, because my way of studying history was like derived from passion, curiosity, and just relaxation that I liked doing during my free time, it's a little bit of different the way I approach history in such a fascinating way rather than boring. Yeah.
I can tell already that you must be an amazing tour guide. I think I want to book, because you're talking about history that you can smell, that you can feel, that you can walk around. Like it's an experience rather than a stale piece of information in a book. And that's such an interesting approach, Kay. You've talked about how like how you understand history, how you perceive history, and it's very sort of empirical and it's very hands-on and it's realistic. What if I ask you this question before we could go further, like, what is history? Now, this was sort of a famous book by E.H. Carr that sort of had a really profound impact on me when I read it, and I teach it to my students as well sometimes. But here we're questioning what actually history is. Now, this is kind of a bit of an abstract philosophical question, but do you have any thoughts on what history is, Kay? This kind of subject that interests you. You've spoken about how you experience it, but what is history?
Again, very abstract question, but
I'm sorry.
I actually know E.H. Carr's What is History, the book, because my teacher mentioned it in my IB history class, and it's very famous.
Yeah.
He talks about what history is, and I think there's a very big debate between if history is, you know, in the realm of sciences, you know, it's being in the column of human sciences. And I think history is counted as like a human, like realm of human sciences, but it gets separated as a part of science. Like that's a little bit questionable in my sense. Science is like derived from, you know, evidence-based quantitative research about like logical reasoning, and something that's different. Yes, history can be a part of science, but also a different theme. Like the element that makes it different is historiography, you know, because perspective and scope comes into play when talking about historiography within the origin of purpose of it. And I think that's a little bit different compared to science or any other subject. That it's for sure that history is something that we should all know and repeat, to not repeat the same mistakes. And that's a little bit different from other subjects, and it connects to why we should be learning history.
Yeah, whether it's a science, whether it's a humanity, but it's kind of like stories, and they're stories that we tell about ourselves to other people who pass on the stories. So there's this narrative aspect of it, which is perhaps not always there in the hard sciences. And in that sense, Kay, like, you're part of that narrative. You're one of these storytellers now that brings this on. You mentioned already a little bit about Japanese colonization and the independence fighters in Seodaemun Prison. Now, if we have a look sort of at Korean history, some people say that Korean history is a pretty peaceful thing, and they look at the long-standing dynasties, you know, running for centuries, and then when they transfer over to the other ones, there's not too much internal strife. Of course, it's not all peaceful and kumbaya, but it's very different, these scholars say, from the wars that spread through mainland Europe and things like this very, very frequently. Other people say that Korean history is very tragic and traumatic, and a history of invasions and all of these bad things. So there are many perspectives on Korean history. When you look at from today back into the past about Korea, is it a beautiful story? Is it a sad story? Is it a positive one? Is it one of loss and tragedy? What's your feeling about what has gone on before in Korea?
I mean, I would say a mix of everything. I mean, you can't really, like, I couldn't give a specific answer to what is history. I think what is Korean history, there's no really specific like answer. But in terms of like when I'm talking about Korean history, we can't really leave out the factor of agony or pain. But we can't also leave out the peaceful transitions, or how much like our ancestors had a great time enjoying these traditions and cultures and what happened during the time. And every country has its own agony. And in order for them to see growth and development, there are positives to shine over the negatives. Agony and suffering sometimes follows, and it's kind of a result. And Koreans have every right to be mad about it because of this, like, especially because, you know, apologies shouldn't be an event or piece of paper, but really a behavior. Koreans should be mad in some aspects. And because of those, you know, painful situations, that's what makes our history our history. That's what I think. And I'm not saying that Korean like Korea is worth the praise for those agony, because it is a fact that, for example, like the Imjin War, it was one of the biggest wars that happened during the period, especially because, you know, it was even before the First and Second World War. But I think that in some aspects, Koreans have the tendency to like overly emphasize, or sometimes focus too much on the victim mentality that we have. Yes, they have the right, but I think that the way that people kind of overcame those painful instances and the peaceful transitions, like for example of Koguryoshinna and Baekje, you know, those things could be more emphasized in order to, you know, go to like the future steps of Korean history. And as writing history ourselves in present day, I think that's what we could focus on, the positives, you know, even though all of those things make up what Korean history is.
This would be a really difficult question, but do you have any idea why there is this focus on the victim mentality? Because I observed that too, and I've spoken recently to Dr. Kang Min-soo about Han and all these kind of things. And the story of Korea could be told in many different ways. You've said that it could emphasize the positives and the culture and the stability, but for the most part, it seems that a lot of Korean history, not all of it, but a lot of it focuses on this kind of, use the words, victim mentality. Is there a reason for that? Does it make a better story? Does it help bring people together? Is it something inherent in the Korean people, or is there more truth to that? Like, why do you have any feeling as to why that side might be emphasized more?
I think because it's just like pretty direct, because it had a big influence in our ancestors. And to this day, like if you see like you know, the problem of wianbu, which is like the woman that during the time, and what Japanese people, or like sometimes other countries has done to our country as a smaller country between big countries like Japan and China, it's unavoidable to talk about those things. And it was a very big, painful aspect in our country, because especially I took Imjin War as an example, which was also, you know, affected by the Japanese people. Till that point in Joseon Dynasty, for 200 years out of the about 500 years of history of Joseon Dynasty, they didn't have a single war. So everything was peaceful and people weren't expecting it. And I think because Koreans have the pure good mentality of, you know, peacefulness and well-mindedness, it really affected us more. And that's basically the same situations for other countries and other wars as well. But because it was so evidently existent, the painfulness in our lives, I think that's a little bit more of the reasons why it gets emphasized. But at the same time, it's also used as a factor to bring us all together. And you know, people say Pegemin족, which is like the people of whites. And also, if you look in, you know, soccer matches, especially Korea versus Japan, like everyone's all about that. And, you know, the results are everything for Korean people. So I think it's not a bad thing to have victim mentality and to feel sad and mad about those things. But at the same time, we should still try. Yeah.
And maybe there is the sense that, you know, you're the new generation, you're part of the new storytellers, that it might change over time, the views of history, I think, and how it's perceived. Are there any other big, or are there any misunderstandings you find with Korean history? Because a lot of the time we get, you know, just subconsciously our ideas of history sometimes come to us through television dramas, through movies, just through the general public narrative, and they don't always line up with what actually happened. You know, we might watch, I'll just use one example, like Braveheart or the movie Titanic, and think, yeah, I know what happened, but it's not actually quite what happened. Do you have any thoughts about perhaps misunderstandings about Korean history? Are there things that people sometimes perhaps like get wrong, or any comments on the way that Korean history is presented in dramas and movies?
I mean, there's definitely a lot of dramas, K-dramas regarding, Joseon Dynasty, Goguryeo Dynasty, and
Mm.
um, a lot of people come to me as a tour guide when they're coming to these, palaces or historic sites. They're like, I've seen this setup before. I've seen it on the TV or dramas, and as much as flattering that is that they're that much interested in Korean history, a lot of some elements
Mm.
that are presented or directed in the movie are sometimes false, or it was set up to manipulate the storyline of the drama
Sure.
to make it more interesting. And I think that's one of the main common mistakes that people make as seen as a tour guide, that people come and they expect what they've seen on TV, but it's not quite the same. And as mentioned before, the painfulness and the agony is
Mm.
also should be emphasized rather than the love story of the drama, or the factual understanding must come as well within the K drama, or
Mm.
yeah. So I think that's one of the main misunderstandings that foreigners have, as seen by a tour guide. But also we can't rule out the fact that Koreans also have misunderstandings about other countries as well. I think
Mm.
one of the things that I personally, while I was studying history and being exposed to an international community, was really confusing, was if you study history, because I'm also Korean with victim mentality, I'm kind of biased in that sense. You get the hatefulness. Like, I have hatred in my mind about what happened to our people, because it wasn't good stuff. But at the same time, one of the misunderstandings that Korean people have is, oh, all the Japanese are bad people,
Mm.
everyone's bad, Mongol people, or like Chinese people, they did these stuff to our country, and all the Japanese people are very bad people. But I think in that sense, Korean people needs to be a little bit more generous in that sense. Like, I'm trying to cope with it myself as well, but Japanese government have, like, they've been struggling with those kind of issues for a long time, and it's government versus government. But when it comes to people or their culture, I think a lot of Koreans also misunderstand, like foreigners misunderstand our Korean culture and history for
Mm.
what they've seen on television or what they've heard, because history itself, it's not what you experience firsthand, it's just a different perspective of connections. We as well need to like cope with the differences, and build on more respect for other countries as well, even though Korea's doing great. But yeah, just one thing.
It's it's super cool that you're even aware of your own biases and prejudices and things like that, and the hates, and it's natural as well. I think we do feel them. It was lawyer Hwang Yun-jung, when I spoke to her, she said this one thing to me, Kay. She said, David, if you hate someone, then someone will hate you too. And I was just like, oh, it's one of the most profound things I ever heard, that if you do, hate other people or have these ill feelings towards other nations, then that might come back to your nation as well. Do you have to watch any of these saguks? So like saguks are, but just for people listening, like these period dramas, these K-dramas where people go around palaces in these hanboks and looking at, do you have to watch them to stay up to date? So when like tourists come up to you and go, is this like that drama? And you have to go, yes, no, or you don't watch them for fun or for study, or?
Actually, I did started watching some of them just because,
Mm.
tourists come and they talk to me about it. That's I think, one of those studying that we also need to do, not in terms of history, because, historical information already presented in the dramas should be familiar to us, but
Mm.
in terms of studying the people and how to engage in the conversations, or to make history more appealing, because it can be boring sometimes to those people who visit the historic sites. So I think I've watched many, but like dramas like or like movies like Amsar, or her,
Mm.
one of the newer ones, I think it's on Netflix, Heowa. It's based on like historical uh backgrounds. I think I still have to watch in order to follow up, and kind of see, and as a tour guide and as a student studying history, if there's things wrong, or like if things are directed well or different in the movie compared to like the historical information I notice. So that's also more fun for me to watch. And obviously I love the love line in the story in the dramas as well, so I actually quite enjoy watching them.
Sometimes it can be a great burden knowing history, because you watch these things and you're just going, no, no, no. And you can't enjoy it anymore. It's like knowing what they put in McDonald's burgers or something. It changes the experience completely. Just as we're sort of coming towards your work as a tour guide here, which I want to talk about, Kay, you've mentioned some of your international experiences and things like this, and foreign people coming to you and asking questions. Now, I'm just curious about this. In Korea, it's kind of common for foreign people to go around palaces wearing hanboks and things like that. And you can get into the palaces for free by doing that.
Yeah.
Are you cool with this? Do you like this? So like people rock up to you and they've got their hanboks on and they're like, let's walk around the palace? Or do you think like, that's my culture, that's my history? Like, because it's different in different parts of the world, isn't it? That kind of attitude to wearing clothes. So does that happen when you're doing tour guides? Are you cool with it? Do you have any thoughts on these people wearing the hanboks when you take them around the palaces?
I actually really don't mind. I actually love that foreigners are enjoying our culture, and because we've been so desperate for attention. Okay, this sounds a little bit weird, but because we wanted that fame and the interest from foreigners to think about our culture, experience them, and engage with them for such a long time, I personally, at least, think it's a great way to engage foreigners into actually experiencing what it feels like to wear hanbok. That also leads to empathizing. Sometimes people might say, it must have been so uncomfortable for women to wear all of these dresses back during the time, or in the summer it's actually quite nice to wear breezy like clothing. Like I think that also interconnects with what people thought during the time, and that's also engaging with culture and history. And yes, some people might think, it's our culture, like why are you taking it away? But that's only existent to me when people claim it's our thing, it's not yours. It's a relevant issue in China and Korea. Yeah, so but only one concern about wearing hanboks in palaces is that actually a lot of the hanboks that people like borrow from nearby stores are actually not traditional hanbok design. So like they would take designs from like kimonos from Japan, or like Chinese traditional clothing, just because they're more prettier, or maybe they might be more appealing to others. They integrate those designs into our traditional clothing, and that's kind of one minor issue that I find when I think about foreigners wearing hanboks, just because I'm afraid that they're gonna get the wrong impression of that's what a hanbok is. Yeah, but other than that, I'm loving that foreigners are enjoying wearing those our customs. And yeah.
I'm glad you said that, because there's lots of photos online of me and my family wearing hanboks. And if you said, no, I hate it, I'll be like, maybe I have to delete these photos. But no, it's a different thing. You mentioned this, we will get to your tour guide thing eventually, I promise. You mentioned this kind of China Korea claiming history thing. So I just want to touch on that for a second, because it's been a huge topic of conversation, like the ownership of various things, whether it's kimchi, whether it's hanbok, whether it's celebrities using the right or wrong words, the cancelling of certain dramas, was it Joseon Gumasa, the Joseon Exorcist and things. When this happens and history becomes a huge thing on social media, I'm not talking about K-pop stars, they're talking about history here. Do you feel some kind of, justification, pride in like, it's now history, now we're really talking? Do you, or do you think like, just leave it to the experts? How do you feel, Kay, when you see history becoming a really big talking point across social media discourse, which we've seen in the last 12 months or so?
I think I feel I don't leave it to the experts. I think these kind of problems, which is regarding awareness and knowledge about history, that just shouldn't be coming from experts, you know. I'm not an expert, like I'm a tour guide and I have comparably more knowledge than other people possibly, but I think that's one of my responsibilities as a person who is already knowledgeable of those things or the issues about history that is present now. It's a hot issue to educate the public or educate people that I can possibly think of why this is being problematic or why this might be a you know, a worthy issue to talk about. And, you know, maybe if some people think differently, talk about why they think it's different and why I think that what they're claiming is, you know, sometimes wrong or, you know, worth talking about. And I think definitely don't leave it to the experts, but as long as you're passing on the right information to the right people, educating and spreading awareness, like, you know, people did to Black Lives Matter, even though it's a little bit different in terms of those stories, it's a sense of awareness that more like the more people that have, the better. And that's what experts are trying to do, get their voice out into the public and, you know, kind of make things the right way. And that, you know, it's not really editing a book. You know, it's not like something's written differently and it's just happens better if we edit the book and that's it. It's just the way people think forms that kind of, you know, societal issues. And I think that's a worthy topic to talk about, like, all throughout. Yeah.
In terms of editing a book, there's always that question. I think a couple of people did try it to write a book of Northeast Asian history that like Korean people, Japanese people, Chinese people, North Korean would all agree on. Like, because if history is a thing, that book should be possible, but perhaps we're not quite there yet, sadly. Let's talk about you being a tour guide, Kay, because I mean, this is one of the things you do, and like, I guess I want to start with these two questions. Like, how did you get into being a tour guide? Because you started doing it very young. I can't remember what grade you said, but sometimes I get confused, like how old is 8th grade or 6th grade? It's really confusing to me. So like, how old were you when you got into it? And then when you do it, how, because I've been on lots of tours with various organizations, with the British Embassy, the Royal Asiatic Society, and there's normally a wonderful tour guide, and she walks around like with a stick. She's a very old lady. She's in her 70s perhaps, but she walks around with a stick and sort of taps and points at things. And so the second question would be like, how do you do it? What is the process like? If somebody were to come to Korea and go on a tour with you, what is the K experience?
Okay. Well, firstly, I started giving tours when I was 11. So I was in 5th grade. But, oh, actually, no. I started studying to give tours when I was in 11th grade, so about history. And I started giving tours when I was in 8th grade, so that's like about 14 years old. So it took 3 years of studying time. But I took 6 months of the professional course, learning how to be a professional tour guide when it comes to, you know, just giving tours, because sometimes you need credibility and reliability when giving tours. But moving on to, you know, what people might expect coming on my tours, I think the first priority that I think of when I talk to tours is that I might be the only actual local Korean that they are going to talk to. You know, talking about the audience of my tours, I don't get reserved tourists. It's not like there's a website and people book to see me. I just genuinely volunteer for free in historic sites. So like, for example, if it's the Kyungyeon Palace, I go there every month and I walk up to foreigners at subway stations near the palace or at the main gate or near the ticket box, and I ask them, do you want a tour? Do you want to know more about Korean history? Because sometimes they're looking at a map and they look puzzled and they have no idea where to go. And, you know, history is so much fun with commentation. So that's what that's the audience of my tours. And that's why I focus on the fact that I might be the only local person that they might meet, other than, you know, people selling stuff at the store, or, you know, people talking in the subway. But I just try to make it more engaging for the people so that they would be more interested in the content. You know, I could go full on content, fact, but sometimes that's not as fun. So I kind of get them to engage, know a little bit more about each other. Where do you come from? What's your culture like? And I kind of try to incorporate these things that they might personally engage on. You know, for example, interconnecting like cultures. Like, so let's say like a French person would come, and I would talk about the Palace of Versailles compared to Gyeongbokgung, or just those things that can make the tourists more engaged in the conversation itself, drawing their attention and focus, and making them be favorable to Korean history or culture itself. What I'm trying to advocate my country for is, I guess, one of my themes. Yeah, so I think one trick that I really like to use is making them really knowledgeable of what they're surrounded with in Korea, because, you know, sometimes when you come to Korea, there's a lot of new things. So for example, when we're talking about Irarobongdo, it's a painting behind the throne, the king's throne in the palace. I asked them to bring out their manwon bill, and I asked them, do you see this picture? And I kind of engage and interact with real life surroundings that they can interact more with and engage more with. And that's, I think, one of my tactics for making people more interested in my tours. And that's how I kind of interconnect and reach my goal at last. Yeah.
And then they might take that manwon note home with them and then look at it and then remember your tours and things like that. That's very cool. Like, you said a beautiful thing, Kay, which is that, you know, you might be the only Korean that they speak to on their trip here. And that is, you know, a reality. And it's so cool that you go out of your way to do it. Isn't it a bit like scary, you know, stranger danger and all that kind of thing? Like going up to, I mean, no disrespect, I'm sure you can handle yourself and stuff, but like going up to people like that and at these public spaces and saying, do you want to tour? Is there any kind of like fear or rejection, or it's totally cool?
Oh, actually. So the highest rejection count that I've had was 12 times. So
what you mean in a row? 12 in a row?
Yeah, 12 in a row. So
wow.
I was there, and sometimes it takes minimum 20 minutes, 15 minutes to get like a tourist to come with me to go into the palace. Like, for example, if we were to meet in a subway station, I've waited like an hour and a half max to get someone to talk to me. And a lot of this comes from misunderstandings from foreign countries, because I say it's a free tour and I try to put credibility on them, but sometimes it's not as because I'm a young person. But that acts as a minus and a plus factor in terms of giving tours. So sometimes people hesitate because I'm a stranger. They hesitate to talk to me, or because they haven't talked to a Korean, you know, sometimes they're very startled. But at the same time, I think I'm not as stressed or pressured to talk to new people because I'm very extroverted. And living in Korea, where it's very, very safe wherever you go, I haven't really had the chance. And I kind of like eye people when before like talking to them, like, will I be safe throughout the next 1, 2, 3 hours that I'm going to be talking to them? Or, you know, are they actually reliable people that I can spend time with? That's, you know, I'm selecting them. So, but as a tour guide, I think I'm not really hesitant to talk to anyone, but rather they're hesitant to talk to me. Yeah.
It's cool positivity that you have. I really dig that. So what kind of people do you, when you said you eye them, like using your nunchi, which kind of people do you think like they'll be good for a tour? They might say yes. What are the giveaways? Is it like a pair of Crocs? Is it a bum bag? Is it a camera? I don't know, but like, how do you eye them? What are the giveaways?
Well, sometimes it's, I mean, one of my merits for giving tours is I interact with like diverse people, whether that's occupation, gender, age difference, or you know, nationality. But you know, just using my Korean nunchi, and sometimes it's just three men against me. I don't know how I feel about that. I do have experience giving tours to people like that, but sometimes it's just a nice family group who has children the age of me or like younger, or sometimes it's just ladies who come as like a girls trip to Korea. So it really depends on the weather, how I feel that day, the mood, how moody I feel, you know. And if I'm feeling adventurous, I would go talk, but there's always that safe option that I can rely on.
Yeah. Okay. I really like that. Yeah, and it's real, like your mood and things like that, how you feel that day. In your book, Kay, when I was reading that, you talk about like coming to this realization that when giving a tour, and you've said that your age is like a plus and a minus, it can work for you and against you, but then this the realization you have of being a tour guide and your appearance, to look respectful, your clothes, your hair, your uniform, like what's that like? Do you have any comment on this idea? So when you're walking around these places, it's almost as if you become a representative of the nation, don't you? You become a representative of Korea. Like I can see you like smiling at that, as if to say, I can think you're going like, yes, that's right.
Yeah.
What's that like, Kay, doing that?
I would say I definitely feel like a representative, and like I've mentioned before, I might be the only Korean they talk to, so I always want to feel prepared, and sometimes giving that credibility, whether that's because of my age or because I'm a foreigner, or because, you know, I'm Korean that they want to know more about, I want to be prepared as much as possible, and that comes from appearance as well. So sometimes I always am in uniform. So I am a part of this organization, which a group of teen guides give tours, but we have our uniform. It's orange, so anyone can spot us wherever we go. You can see us from like 2 blocks down. And I sometimes wear white gloves just to give the credibility and to look professional. But you know, if you just walk up, just pull up to the tour, like historic site, with a pair of Crocs like you mentioned, or, you know, baggy jeans, I don't know if people are going to be as you know. And because I'm not a part of the palace tour guide, I'm not like one of the people that the palace actually have instructed and gathered people for my tour. Because I reach out to people, I think that's especially more important when coming to being prepared visually, or you know, sometimes thinking about what they might question me for, and if I'm available to respond to those questions. So yeah.
Is there I love the white gloves, like Korean people, the white gloves mean you're official and you're working. Like,
yeah.
I'll tell you, it's a bit TMI, but when I got married, the one thing that I refused to do was wear white gloves. It's like, I do everything else. Like I wear the tux. Yeah, absolutely. The tux, I'm all good. And the dance, the waltz, we do all that. But like, I was like, no white gloves. They're very common here, aren't they? Let's talk about some of these sites, I think, Kay. You already mentioned it a little bit, but like Seodaemun Prison, this is a pretty heavy place. Like, why so there might be people listening to this that don't have any background information about Seodaemun Prison or anything. So I guess, can you explain to us what it is and the position it plays in Korean history, why it's important? What does this prison stand for? What does it mean?
Okay, so Seodaemun Prison was built during the Japanese colonial era with the purpose of, you know, having independence fighters or people that were, you know, let's say problematic in the society, in the eye, with the subjective perspective of Japanese people, to put them in cells, and, you know, that's the purpose of what a prison is. But the reason why it was built in Seodaemun, which is a local place in Seoul, is because as they were transitioning from a military force kind of tactic to colonize the Joseon dynasty, as they were changing from that military tactic, they changed to a cultural tactic, you know, for instance, like having people cut their hair, because our tradition was having long hair, whether that's men or women, or in some aspects not letting people speak their language. But this came in during those times where the Japanese thought cultural colonization was more important. So they built a prison in the middle of the city to give awareness and just that pressure for people, and for people to acknowledge that, oh, if you do something wrong in our subjective standards, you might go there as well. And it was really controversial if you were going to take part in the independence fight or not. Some people, like, this is very controversial in Korea as well, but some people betrayed Koreans and they also worked for the Japanese, and some people were fighting so hard and, you know, getting killed by the Japanese, getting tortured. And this is one of the prisons that was present. So a lot of famous independence fighters, like Yu Sun, she's one of the very young independence fighters. Actually, I think she was my age when she died. But she also was prisoned here, and a lot of very famous independence fighters were prisoned here, and they suffered through tortures and, like, you know, work labor, like the Auschwitz prison in Germany, very similar. But in that sense, this is why it's a very hefty topic to talk about. And you know, historic sites, the atmosphere itself is very scary. Yeah.
Does the Yu Sun story, like, resonate with you? Does that add to the, I don't want to say the word, the fascination with the prison, but does it help you understand it? Does it help you empathize or sympathize? And again, there might be some people that are not too sure about the Yu Sun story, so we might have to explain it. But does that help sort of you feel the reality of what these historical sites were, help them come alive to you when you sort of narrate and tell these stories?
Well, I kind of want to elaborate more on the Yu Sun story, so just that people can get the understanding. But so in Korea, we have the March 1st movement that actually we take days off now to you know, give respect. But in that March 1st movement, which is one of the critical elements that pressured the Japanese to gain independence back for our country, Yu Sun, a female independence fighter, actually took part and was very influential in that movement to drive Korea towards a little bit closer towards independence. And she, after that incident and a lot more like influential things that she did to fight for independence, she was prisoned in this Seodaemun prison that we're talking about. And to get back to the question, I think, yes, definitely. And now that I think about it, because we're similar age, a Korean girl living in Korea, I can't imagine doing those things that she did to fight for our country. Even though I love our country, it's just so, like, it's very great things that people do in order to establish that. And I feel so bad every time I go back to the prison and imagine the things that all the independence fighters went through. Because if you go there, there's a museum part, and then there's actually the cells and the PE you know, systems that they used back then to kind of reiterate and help people imagine what it was really like back at the time. And just thinking of these specific scenarios like Yu Sun, or who that independence fighter is, thinking about that and thinking what they have gone through in those exact places, it really makes me empathize and, you know, feel more respect to those people. And I think that's really you know, triggers me to love our country more, and you know, advocate for our country in that sense. Yeah.
How do the tourists, how do the foreign people react when you're telling them about death and torture and these kind of crimes inflicted against innocent people, independence fighters, young women? Because talking to you, Kay, you're obviously a very positive person. You're very bright, you're very vibrant, but this is heavy stuff, and you're having to convey the heaviness of this. Like, how does that get across? And I guess also, does it have any sort of effect on you as a person? Because I'm just imagining if you were experiencing this, like, once sometimes is enough. You know, if you watch a heavy movie or read a heavy book, you're like, whew, you know, that's enough for now. Like, I'm going to go and watch some drama or some Disney. But, you know, how do the tourists react to it? And does it have any kind of effect on you, I guess, as well, having to constantly relive this?
Well, I think I can share the first time that I brought somebody to listen to my tour in Seodaemun, which is actually my mom and my brother. And I think my brother's 5 years younger than me. So when we first went there for me to study how to give tours, he was very, very young. And I still remember vividly that my brother hesitated to go into the museum itself, where they were displaying like torture methods and stuff, because it was so scary, and he was with the young mindedness, and I was even scared to go in it myself, you know. It was really hesitant for me to study those topics, and thinking about, like, it's very abstract when you think about, oh, independence fighters, like they were hundreds or tens of years away. But at the same time, if you actually look at those things, it's very different. And when I tell these things that me, as my brother, has felt to foreigners who kind of is disconnected from that feeling of being the same country, like they don't have the same nationality, they don't have the same culture, they're not aware of what people think like in Korea about these specific events. It's kind of sometimes struggling factor for me to help them connect with those cultural aspects or the historic aspects. And this is really kind of sad in the sense that people hesitate to visit Seodaemun Prison, actually. Like, regardless of what if they want a tour or not, there are generally really, really less people in Seodaemun Prison compared to other historic sites like Gyeongbokgung or any of the 5 palaces, because Seodaemun Prison is such a hefty topic. And if a person is really interested in history, they would visit it. And I have given tours there to foreigners, and I have had people living in Korea ask me how to get there, or what they need to know before going into the prison. But at the same time, when tourists come, because, you know, it's traveling, they want to be happy, they're kind of hesitant to visit those places. And I think that's one of my goals also, for them to connect and sometimes feel sad for what our country has gone through, and sometimes you know, have them gain knowledge about these specific things. So sometimes, as a person repeating that over and over again, I kind of have to get a strong mindset of, it's okay, it's already over, but what really matters is I need to get this out. I need to get the word out for people to be more knowledgeable about this, or because even to Koreans, because these sufferings were there, and because these tortures and this prison, the time that they have spent in this specific place was present, that's the reason why we are able to be people who we are right now as Koreans. And I think that's instead of like reliving the torture, and, you know, I think every time I do that, I gain more respect, and I gain the importance of those historic sites. Yeah.
Do you, brilliant answer. Do you do you see many Korean people on the tours to Seodaemun Prison? I'm just wondering, like, if more Korean people went, because you say some people are hesitant, you know, and it's excuse me, if it's a warm Saturday afternoon, it's like, let's go visit Seodaemun Prison. It's not the immediate thing. Do you see many Korean people there? Do you think more Korean people should visit? Is there something that could be done to encourage, or do you think enough people are already aware of the realities of it?
I think they're aware that a place like that exists. Like, it's in Korean textbooks and history textbooks. Or if I say the word Seodaemun Prison, or if I ask someone, oh, do you know what a Seodaemun Prison is? They would know the existence of it, but they wouldn't completely be sure, like me, oh, what it is and why this is the importance. They wouldn't get it. But actually, very surprising. I'm quite proud of this. When I go to historic sites like that, a lot of mothers or like parents bring their children to educate their children about the places. So, like some schools, even they go on field trips to like the palaces or the Seodaemun Prison. And actually, because there's less foreigners in Seodaemun Prison, like as a historic sites, when I go there to give tours, like some now and then, I would actually fail to find a foreigner. So I would end up giving tours in Korean to Korean people, and they would be, appreciative that I'm sharing these knowledges. And I think that's kind of one thing that I would want to get more Koreans to actually visit the palace and study like the specific details and the importance of it, like I am trying to get foreigners to do that. But at the same time, there are people, especially like kids brought by their parents, or schools going on field trips, which I think is a way to start on that, getting the experience and the importance of it. Yeah.
If you give a tour in Korean to Koreans, or if you give it in English to other people, does it change? Of course, the language changes, but do you turn up the violence? Do you turn down the suffering? Do you change the narrative? Do you emphasize certain things? Do different things resonate? Do you not pull out the man one, or does it change according to the audience, Kay?
I think in some aspects, I'm very hesitant to talk about these sufferings to foreigners, because in a third person perspective, it might just sound like, oh, she's just saying that because it's her own country. And yeah, I get it. Your country all went through painful situations, but they don't empathize with it. They don't get what it was actually like. So when I'm talking to foreigners, that's actually my priority. And that might sometimes be, talking about extreme torture methods, or, specific situations that might actually interconnect with them more or help their understanding. But I don't go up to foreigners all the time necessarily saying, oh, our country was like this, and I don't give them like as much general information, because sometimes that might be very tiring for the other person to think about. But at the same time, if I talk to Koreans about it, I have to go in more in-depth detail about what it was generally like during the time, but also adding on the specific factors as well. But it's actually quite easier to get empathy, or having people to engage in the conversation if it's a Korean person, because they are a part of the identity of the victim mentality that people have. So I think there's that bit of a difference, but it's not necessarily, oh, I would take out this factor in order to satisfy this, but it's just the way I talk. And I think when I'm talking to a foreign person, I need objectivity and less bias when I'm talking about like these type of very touchy subjects. So yeah.
I know the feeling exactly. Whenever I'm doing history or something, if Britain comes up, or the United Kingdom, I'm always very hesitant to say something, because it's like you think I'm just going to say this because I'm British myself, but no, it's not like that. It's just, it is what it is. Is there anything, Kay, that we've missed about Seodaemun Prison? Like, before we move on to perhaps some of the palaces, is there anything that we've left unsaid, or is there anything that we need to address about Seodaemun Prison? Or
on that note, I need to open the door.
Okay.
So I'll be right back.
Yeah, go. Sure.
Yep, I'm back. I just not really anything specific, but I just really want to mention that people should visit Seodaemun Prison other than like it's always good to visit a lot of historic sites, but I highly recommend, and if you go visit the historic sites, I think one of the things that tourists or panels like discovery panels fail to mention is that you should take a look at the specific cells and the floors and the walls, because they like people have written specific words like live or like let's fight in those cells, and I think that really gave a big impression on me to empathize with the people that live in those cells and what they have felt fighting through those traumatic situations. So yeah.
Yeah, it must be incredibly moving to see those, and it's like a time capsule, I guess, isn't it? When you see those messages there carved there. Yeah, thank you for that. It's amazing what you do with such a difficult topic, and one, like you say, I think, which is also actually still a little bit connected to modern day politics. It's very difficult because it's not only history, but that Japanese colonization, and it's still very much tied into modern life here. Let's talk about palaces, perhaps, because that's what a lot of people might associate with, and many people might have done these tours. Now, before we get into that, actually, I wanted to ask you about Korean royal families in general. Now, we just spoke about my Britishness. We have Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, so I've grown up with royal families, and lots of places in Europe still have royal families, constitutional monarchs. They don't like rule over us with a stick, but they're there on our money and in our ceremonies. What's your take on Korean royal families in general? There was even a Korean emperor for a few years, wasn't there, from 1897 or something? But like, do you ever wish for a day of Korean kings and queens to return, Kay? Or is it kind of this weird thing? What's your take on the royal families in general here?
I think one of the reasons why, and I think we've mentioned this, that Korea, history of Korea. What am I saying? Sorry, Korean history. They have had a big peaceful, interventions of royal families and the connections and very peaceful transitions. And I think one of the things that is worth mentioning is those peaceful transitions before Joseon Dynasty has led to the royal families that were existent in the Joseon dynasties. And I sometimes think, for my fantasy, that what would it be like if Korean royal families were still existent? But I would actually, it wouldn't be bad, I think, because during the Joseon dynasty, even though there were a lot of drama within the royal family, and who's going to be the next king and stuff like that, but other than the royal family, like you can see in K-dramas, there were officials that were, they take the 과거 test and they, get elected as the officials. And I think the Joseon dynasty and the royal family kind of coped very well with those officials and the royal family, and the power that was distributed was very equal in terms of of course the king was superior, but at the same time the royal family is very well preserved, and considering that they had a dynasty for 500 years, and even before that there were many dynasties like I've mentioned connecting up to that. I think that was really one thing that I should mention, because if we compare it to Russian history, for example, Stalin, when he rose to power, all of his contenders were, they were either dead because Stalin wanted them to, or they were, they were steered away from the power. But for example, the three kingdom period, 고구려, 신라, and 백제, even though they have constantly fought over who was in charge of in terms of unifying the country, they still had all the people, like their contenders were all alive, which is kind of the reason why there's so many Kims and Parks and Lees in Korea right now. But I think though in those sense that royal families in Korean history itself, they have been really developed well in terms of, you know, having a very peaceful transition and, you know, just dividing power and staying in power as well. So I think generally I have a very positive mindset about it.
And not too many gulags, which is a good thing. You mentioned Stalin there. Yeah, the fewer gulags we have, and you are a park.
Yeah.
Part of the story yourself, Kay. Let's talk a bit. Let's start with Eunhyun Palace, because you do tours there. Yeah. This is like more of a residence than a palace, I think. We'll bring this place to life for us, Kay. Let us understand Eunhyun Palace.
Okay. I think even Koreans, when we talk about Eunhyun Palace, a lot of people might be a lot less familiar about this, just because a lot of people are well known about the 5 main palaces of the Joseon dynasty, because Eunhyun Palace is kind of like a little bit different in the sense that you've mentioned it's a residency, and it was actually a private residence of the father of the 26th king, as well known as Seodaemun, because the 26th king was not a blood heir to the throne. I mean, he was like the cousin of the previous king, the 25th king. So his father actually was in power for a very, very long time instead of the 26th king, because when he started, like when he became king, he was 7 years old. So obviously he couldn't really take control. So his father kind of took in the country, and he made very, very big changes, which was also controversial during the time in terms of like foreign policies and stuff. He remained as a very, very important character in history, and that's why people, his residency become one of the palaces as well. So we call it that Eunhyun Palace. Yeah.
What does it look like? So I'll perhaps try to bring up some pictures or something like, what does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it smell like? You're walking around it, this place. Can you paint a picture for us, Kay?
So there's a very, very high fence around the house, right? That's standing for high dignity, and important person lives in there. And obviously it's a tiled roof house, which is understanding of high person, like royalty, or very high, not a commoner's house. Yeah. There's a very big gate, also high gates stand for high dignity in Joseon dynasty. And when you walk in, there's a big field, like a front yard kind of sense, if you compare it to you know, foreign houses. But and then you go in, and the structure itself is very, very very comparable to just basic style of Korean traditional houses back at the time, because the traditional housing, you have a men's quarters called the 사람체, and then the women's quarters called the 안체. And the 안체 is always inside compared to the men's living quarters, because men's living quarters were used more frequently by guests, and they were protecting the women's living quarters from being seen out in the outside, because women were to only work in the households, and men were a little bit more social, like I think a lot of countries traditionally are familiar of. So that's like the general outline of what it looks like. So there's men's living quarters, women's living quarters, and some buildings are used for servants that work through the house and stuff. But yeah, overall very calm, peaceful place, and it's actually really, really close to the secondary palace, which is Changdeok, and it's between Changdeok and Gyeongbokgung, the main palace. So it's placed really, really like in central Seoul. Yeah.
We'll get on to Changdeok in a second, but like you mentioned, these kind of inside outside rooms, and like for the women there would be the anbang, or the inside rooms, and so women would be in the private, men would be in the public. Do you have any take? I mean, sometimes when we watch the dramas or the movies or the saguks, it's very romantic, and women walk around in beautiful hanboks and paintings and writing poetry. But do you get any sense? You spoke about the reality of Seodaemun Prison, and you spoke about, you know, being there, and you were able to put yourself in that position and feel that pain, that fear, the reality of life inside that residence, inside Eunhyun Gung. What does that feel like to you? Does it feel grand? Does it feel sort of very separated in that male and female thing? Do you have any take from your modern perspective on what life was like inside on a day-to-day basis?
I would definitely say the palace itself is grand. Not grand as, you know, the main five palaces, but at the same time, because it was a place, a house of a very, very high official, I think it is very comparably big to other traditional houses, especially in Seoul, because it's very concentrated, since it's the capital. But at the same time, in my modern perspective, because I'm a very outgoing, adventurous person, and I also highly believe in gender equality. I think in some aspects women are very concentrated in a small like area of space, because they couldn't go out, and their social you know, interpretation as women are very restricted, and that meant that behaviors that they did even within their quarters were limited into certain stuff. They you know, I think a lot of people say, oh, that's not, you know, that's not feminine enough, you know, the clothes you're wearing is not like, oh, it's not girly enough, you know. Nowadays in the modern life, people acknowledge the problems with that, and they deal with to like they deal to overcome gender inequality. But at the same time, because it's traditional, and I can't really exclude this because it is a part of our culture, you know, women were restricted and men were socially more outgoing, and sometimes men also dealt with problems with that, because, you know, there were too much pressure to you know, succeed in the Kwago test, or there were too much pressure to, as the firstborn male in the family, you have to take on the family, and there were pressure for men. But at the same time, you know, it's existent in like literature books, or just books written by women, like in the late Joseon period, that some women were really restricted, and that really made them feel small as an individual itself. And that's where, like, as it got into the modern days, like during the, like, as foreign culture started coming in with America, England, even Japan, that's kind of where women kind of started to get a little bit liberated. And even that's present, like it's evident in their like customs and the way they dress. Like their dresses like used to be really, really big, but as time passes on, it's more about convenience. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good perspective, Kay, that you understand that, and how like you would get this liberation of women, like Mary Scranton would start educating women with Iwa and things like this, and you get Shin Yosong and new women with short hair and different things. Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Let's come on to some of that perhaps towards the end of the conversation, but we did mention Changdeok Palace, and this is the secret garden, right? And I just want to, is that where that is? Yes, I get confused sometimes. I get confused with British palaces as well. It's not just about Korea, but it's amazing walking around this place. We've done it like anytime relatives or friends come to Korea, we're like, yay, let's go to the secret garden, just because it sounds so good. Tell us about this place, because it's in the middle of the city, but there's so much wonderful landscape there, isn't there?
I think so. The secondary palace, Changdeok Palace, is very comparable to the main palace, Gyeongbokgung, in the sense that the main palace is very formal and structured well. Like even if you look at the building structures, it's one behind another and another and they're placed very in a straight line. But comparably, the secondary palace, not just this the secret garden, but the residency area before the secret garden as well, it's very liberated in the sense that its focus was to connect with nature. So whereas they would prefer lined up structures of buildings, the secondary palace really focused on having people to connect more with nature and, you know, looking at what is beautiful around them. And because there was the mountain in the back, and, you know, Seoul itself is connected with Fort Mountains around the capital. They really try to focus on that. And even the secondary palace, a lot of the buildings inside they don't have walls. They sometimes have windows if they were constructed like comparably later, or they have like a lot of pavilions with no walls that they can enjoy, a lot of ponds and a lot of trees and nature. And I think that's kind of really something that our ancestors wanted back in the days, because actually one of the religions called Tokyo, or like a lot of just basic knowledge that our ancestors produced, was really highly interconnected with nature. Like even like the placement of the buildings, like 대산임수, if you would understand, you had to have like a house in certain positions. And I think that's what people thought was really important. And obviously the royalty wanted to enjoy that, and I think they recognized the beauty of our nature back in the days. So I think, yeah.
I want to ask you about that kind of geomancy or feng shui, or in Korean like peng shu, or these different words.
Yeah.
But before that, like this idea of a secondary palace, Kay, and they're relatively close to each other in distance. It's not like having one in the capital and then you have like one in Scotland or Busan or Marseille or something, right? They're relatively close, but is it like one's for the king and the other? Why is it the secondary palace? Who lives there? Do they go like there in the afternoon, or is it a permanent residence for different people? I guess the question is, why is it the secondary palace?
Well, I think one of the main reasons why there were 5 palaces, and no, they didn't, you know, travel in the afternoon, and the king was very, very busy, and all of the royal family. And considering that they're royalty, there were a lot of structure and formal instructions, or, you know, just steps that they needed to take in order to get a king settled in certain places. But the reason why there were so many palaces, and especially for the secondary palaces, because the first main palace, Gyeongbokgung, was destroyed for a long time. So during the Japanese colonial era, the palace was used, but it was you know, captured by the Japanese people. And also after the Imjin War, everything was burnt down in Seoul by the Japanese. So as far as I know, the Gyeongbokgung was actually very, very used for a short period of time at the start of the dynasty, and towards the end of the dynasty, because actually the king's father, who lived in Eunhyun that we talked about before, the father of the 26th king, he actually started reconstructing the main palace after it burnt down during the Imjin War. So that's why these secondary palaces and these other main palaces that are in Seoul kind of started coming into place, and that's why they needed more structure. And all of the palaces actually used to be way much bigger. Like for instance, the main palace right now, it's only they're reconstructing more and more day by day, but originally it used to be only 1/10 of what it originally used to be. So in that sense, because the main palace was not able to be in use, that's why there were more emphasis on the secondary palace. And because it couldn't be in the same characteristics, they implemented this idea of nature and connecting with them, and because they needed the comfort. Yeah.
That idea of nature, you blew my mind a little bit with the idea of pavilions, because, you know, I see the pavilions and the ponds. There's lots of pavilions and ponds, right, in Changdeok, but I never realized that they were houses without walls, in a sense, or that they were wallless so that you could see. I just thought they were something else, but I didn't realize that there would be that intent behind it, so that you could be inside but with no barriers to the outside, if you know what I mean. I just didn't perceive it that way, although of course now I feel very embarrassed by that, but
No.
that's why we're here. You mentioned these kind of like Taoist influences and geomancy, and do you kind of believe in that then? You're walking around these palaces and you're like, well, and if we put it to the east here, this brings good luck, and this is done for good fortune, an auspicious thing, and if the sun comes here and the big mountains there, there's lots of this in Korean history, isn't there? And there's kind of belief in spirits and shamanism and sanshin and all of this stuff. Does that, like, the trials and tribulations of Yugwan-sun have come down to you and you felt some of them? Do you believe in like the spirits and magic of the palaces a little bit? Or?
Actually, well, there's a few different factors like you mentioned, like shamanism and yin and yang, actually, and feng shui, and a lot of things are incorporated in Korean history and Korean architecture itself. But what I personally think, well, I don't believe in shamanism, or because the crown prince had to be in the east because the sun rose from the east. I don't believe like such good luck necessarily, but I think that our ancestors were really smart in the way of using their materials, having the same things that they could manipulate into certain aspects, because for example, let's take feng shui and Pesanimsu. That meant that there had to be a mountain behind the house, and like a river should be, water should be in front of the house, and that's kind of actually really smart for them because they could manipulate the wind and the very nice nature around them, so that while they were living in those houses, it was very convenient. So in that sense, I don't really believe that, because they did that, our ancestors had more luck and that's why they succeeded. Not in that sense, but I think it was very smart for them to manipulate those aspects or the materials that they had already to build some type of structure and rules in terms of like in Korea there were a big chunk of land, but at the same time where to manipulate into our use was very important in that sense. So yeah, I think I don't believe in such necessity, but I think it was very smart for our ancestors to do that. Yeah.
If you imagine telling a group of people, if you have a mountain at the back and the stream in front, it'll be good for the wind and you can do this. People are just going to go, yeah, shut up, I'll do it where I want. But if you tell them, hey, if you do this, it'll be magic, you'll get good luck, people will go, oh, okay. So it's just about how you tell them. Just lie to them. It's magic, man, and they'll believe it. Maybe I missed it when I was reading your book, but I don't have any questions here about Gyeongbok Palace. But we've spoken about it a little bit. Do we need to say something about that? Like, do you do tours there? Do you do those there as well?
Oh, actually, if I didn't include Gyeongbok Palace, which I'm in the editing process, so it's kind of like fluffy in my brain. But if I didn't include Gyeongbok Palace, it was because it was too basic in my sense. I would say that I've given the most tours in Gyeongbok Palace, and it's one of my favorite historic sites, definitely, because it shows the traditional sense of Korean history and Korean architecture, and it's so beautiful, and it's one of the faces of Korea in some aspects. So I mean, yeah, we could touch on Gyeongbok Palace if you have any questions, or yeah.
What does it mean today to Koreans? Like, I'm asking you here a ridiculous question, which is to speak for 50 million South Korean people, which obviously you can't do. But when I was speaking to Seohyun last week, we talked about, presidents moving out of Cheongwadae and things like that. And I was like, I can't imagine the president moving out of his house. It's the president's house. And, I had to understand that in Korea, places might resonate differently and have different things. So my question for you, Kay, is, what does Gyeongbok Palace mean? What does it represent? What does it stand for? What are the images or the values associated with it? What does it mean to Korean people? Is it just a historic site? Is it something more than that? What do you think?
I think for me individually, it feels more. If I say, oh, name one place that you give tours, I would definitely say, oh, Gyeongbok Palace. But and I think it's quite the same to a lot of people that lived back in the days in Joseon Dynasty, because Korean, like Joseon was all about formality and structure. And I think in that sense, Gyeongbok Palace was a big influence to the people as their dignity and the royalty that the country had. And actually, that was one of the reasons why the father of the 26 kings decided to rebuild the palace, because he thought that they needed a wave of motivation, a wave of getting back on their feet after a big war or a Japanese colonial era, or they needed protection. And I think the palace is a very significant infrastructure in terms of the history itself. It shows the hundreds and hundreds years of history that they have gathered. And obviously, because I mean, it wasn't always present because it was down and it was reconstructed and everything. But I think all of the Koreans would also agree that it is one of the representatives of the pride that we have in our Korean history sites, or Korean history, or the treasures that we have. Yeah, because it's not just a building. There's so many small details that is derived from our ancestors' wiseness that can be present in the palace. So it's definitely a significant architecture. Yeah.
And it's right there in the middle of downtown Seoul. That's the interesting thing about it. Like, you're going through traffic jams and traffic lights, and then it's sort of boom, there it is. And it seems to have almost grown. You mentioned this, but it seems to have grown in the time that I've been in South Korea with the reconstructions and sort of the opening of it. It seems to be growing in its presence over the years rather than shrinking. And even they're doing like excavating around the area, aren't they?
One thing for sure is, because Seoul has been growing itself, and it's getting busy and busy by the day, they actually had to move one of these stone structures. It's called Haechi, in front of the palace. They had to move it back because the road was getting so much bigger. And as they're reconstructing the palace, they're finding more and more treasure like buried within the palace grounds or something. So like, for example, Gyeongwon, which is one of the very beautiful pavilions in Gyeongbokgung, it took a very long time than expected to finish reconstruction, because they were finding so much treasure. So I think it's a good thing that we're finding more about history, but at the same time, we have to be careful on the process of reconstruction, not to damage anything, or at the same time, as we are building, we have to be very objective and based on what it was like before.
I'm always hesitant to ask questions because if I sound stupid. Haechi are those kind of like lion things? Can you tell me? They're not lions, are they, though?
No.
I know, but I can visualize them in my mind. But they're not lions. They look a bit like a Pokemon or something that my kids watch. What are they, Kay? Can you just...
It's actually imaginary animals. So it resembles a lion, but its purpose was to give...
that's close.
It's close. Its purpose was to scare the people to live a good, very day-to-day, like, trusted life. And some believe that it breathes fire, and some people say that if you do something bad in the streets, it'll like eat you alive. So the purpose of it was to kind of guide people to the right direction with the fear. But
it's like a Mangtae Halabody or something like that, or a boogeyman for kids. It's
definitely.
He'll get you. This is, when we just talk about reconstruction, this is a bit of a sensitive question, and I ask it respectfully. And it's when I walk around some of these palaces, they sometimes don't look as old as they're told to be. And so, like, they'll say, oh, this is from the 1400s. And I'm looking at it going, I don't think that looks like. And so it might be my ignorance. It might just be the communication. It might be, well, no, it has to be restored and things like that. So it's just my personal experiences of going to these places. Do you have any comments on that? Is it something a bit too touchy, or like, Do you understand the point that I'm making here? That sometimes the dates and the actual physical structure seem a bit different in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, this is actually a very controversial issue in the history like department, I guess, in Korea as well, because so one of the things that is very evident in one of the plus factors in the Korean architecture is tancheong, which is a traditional Korean pattern, and people only paint palaces and temples because it was where the presence of Holy Spirit, like the king or the Buddha, was present in. But it's a very big identity when it comes to palaces, Korean palaces itself. And as time goes on, even though like our ancestors like did a lot of things, like for example putting bushi, which is like a net for to prevent birds from making nests because they can cause damage to the paintings. Even though there were certain efforts like that to prevent damage of those patterns, it still fades away as time goes on, and the rain and all the environmental factors. But Koreans have been going under like a big issue of whether people should repaint that or if they should leave it like that, and also like the reconstruction of buildings as well. And then that's very controversial. But one thing I do to prevent misunderstandings, like what you might have or what people might think as well, is I try to mention that this was under construction because certain reasons, and that's why it may look like a little bit more new than what you have expected, but this is the same exact like copy of what it used to be, because we actually ascribe the annals of the Joseon dynasty, Joseon Wangjosil록. It shows very descriptive ways to how they have they were driven to produce a certain kind of architecture, and there's specific ways, and they give instructions of how to make it as well, so that their purpose itself was to preserve the architecture or preserve their records of what they were living like for the future generations. So I tried to emphasize that in my tours. Yeah.
I think that's a cool thing that you do that. That would probably help. You mentioned this controversy about whether things should be like repainted or what would you do if you were in charge of the Korean Historic Organization and things like that? What would be your approach to restorations or reconstructions or leaving it, or how do you think this should take place with these obvious locations, buildings of such national significance? What do you think should be done?
I also have like controversial opinions in my head. Like some part of me is like, yeah, it's for the foreigners, they can see it more clearly, and it's more pretty, and there's plus factors when you do repaint it. But at the same time, in my other part of my brain, it's like, but the damaged version, in some sense, it also brings beauty because it shows like how old it is and the long traditions and stuff. But yeah, I actually don't know, but I think for me, like my controversial slots in my brain, I may probably repaint some of them, probably leave some of them, because there are some damaged buildings to the extent where you can't really see if it's the actual color of the wood or if it's actually patterns drawn on it. So yeah, I think that's also what the Korean government is doing. Yeah.
I think that makes a lot of sense, because if you were to sort of repaint them all, then you would have no perspective of what it did look like. And if you were to leave them all, then you might lose something. So perhaps by doing a, pan, you get the best of both worlds, and you can you can yassify the palaces and do that thing as well. With history, Kay, like, if you could give a tour, so we've been speaking a lot about your work as a tour guide and how you go about this. If you could give a tour of one place or one time, so like we've got a little like time travel machine, something like that, you can give a tour of one place. It could be Seondok Yewang's throne room, it could be Admiral Lee Sun-shin's bathroom, I don't know. Yeah, don't do that one. Where would you like to give a tour of? What would you like to see? What part of Korean history perhaps still maybe fascinates you or you want to have more experience of?
I mean, as much as I love the historic sites that I do go to now, like the palaces, and I actually also do like traditional Hanok villages like Namsan and Bukchon and stuff, and like all the museums that are present. If I can go back in time, I would actually want to go to the chaoticness of the Imjin War and look at the Goboksan of Isun. It just reminded me because you mentioned Isun bathroom, but I think Isun, he's obviously a very, very, very significant character in terms of our history, but also the Goboksan that he had made, it's a miracle, technically. It was built not so much before the war, and there were a lot of like controversy in terms of like Isun production and the tactics that he used during the time. But I would love to go back for myself at least to watch the chaoticness of the war. I mean, a little bit dangerous, but I think it's so fascinating for me to see. It was even before the First and Second World War. It was one of the biggest wars that happened during the period or in Korean history till then, for people to be in peace for 200 years and suddenly go like it breaks out, a war breaks out, and then they end up fighting and they end up winning because it wasn't their intention to fight in the war. So I really want to go back to see the wiseness of Isun, I guess, in handling those situations. And in wars, nothing's expected. You need to take control of the situation and you need to stay on top of it. And I would love to see how he did that and how he manipulated those, factors like Takobukson or just what the communication between him and the royal family and all the offices, because also that was also very controversial during the time. I would actually really love to get a more hands-on experience with that. Yeah.
So these are the turtle ships that you were just talking about for the listeners. And, like the reason I love talking to people like you sometimes, Kay, is I don't know. I said, do you want to go back to Sondok Yoang's throne room? And like, there's all these and your answer is, no, I want to go and see Admiral Reese and shit at the Imjib Wars and the boats. And that's something that I wouldn't have expected, but is so interesting to hear that that's the time that you would choose. Have you seen any of... They made one movie with Che Min-sik a couple of years ago. I can't... It was called Roaring Currents or something. And there's a new one coming out. Do you watch any of those or...
I think I watched them, but it was such a long time ago, so I don't have like vivid memory. But the chaoticness I love. I don't know why. Maybe I'm weird, but I would be great as a warrior. I should go to the art or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Please do. I made that comment I might have made it in one of my lectures when I was talking about military service, that I think my daughter will make a better soldier than my son. But my son will have to do the military service. But they should really, if they had any Noli, they'd pick my daughter because she's... I want to kind of move on just towards the closing into just a brief talk about like Generation Z and that thing and your age. Is there anything we've missed with history, with tours, or anything, Kay, that we should touch on before stepping to the next phase?
No, actually, I just want to achieve my goal. Having people know more about Korean history and culture. And I know that there's a lot of people working on this like me. There's a lot of websites that you can find online for visiting tours. And I will also keep constantly going to historic sites to give tours. And if you see an orange girl, please come say hi.
with white gloves.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I've got lots of international students in my classes, so I'll mention it to them because that they need to go on the tours. That actually they need the history, because I can't teach them everything, so it's really important that they do that. All right. While you're here, I do want to ask you some questions because how old are you, Kay? Are you
I'm 18 international age, so 19. I voted this year.
Oh, you voted this year. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
I was speaking to Seohyun about Generation Z and youth in Korea, and he gave me lots of different ideas, and quite a few people sent me some messages. They said it was, you know, interesting to hear from somebody so young, rather than just old people talk about young people. Do you think there's a difference between being a 17-year-old boy and an 18-year-old girl in South Korea? Do you think that, you know, the age makes your experiences similar, or the gender makes things very different? What's it like to be an 18-year-old girl in South Korea at the moment, Kay?
Oh, you chose the right person.
Okay,
to talk to about this. I know Seohyun, and Seohyun went to Chadwick since he was very, very young, and I actually got into Chadwick like last year, so 2020 was my first year. And I think in that sense, the realm of international community and being a new person to international community and being in a more traditional side of Korean school is also like a different factor comparing me to Seohyun. And also the age, even though we're the same age, depending on which environment you're a part of, is very different. And also the gender part as well. I want to talk about the gender part a little bit. So I think it's very evident in one of the extracurriculars that I do. I'm actually the captain of our soccer varsity soccer team at school.
What position do you play?
I actually play everywhere, but I play midfield and right wing. But I think that my journey in terms of soccer, my soccer career actually reflects this type of Gen Z difference, but also at the same time, the difference between Korea and international environments and the gender, because currently, I'm in a part of the varsity girls soccer team in Chadwick, but I'm also a part of the Incheon United Academy in Songdo, which means that I play with guys. I'm a part of a guys team, and I'm the only girl. And I've been playing like this for the past 9 years that I've been playing soccer, since I was in 3rd grade. And the reason to that is because girls don't play soccer in Korea. Or you have to be a professional to play. So I got used to playing with guys. And if I take this scenario into the experience that I had during middle school, as a Gen Z, like a very new generation, we're also struggling to get the sense of how the world is changing. So the world is saying gender and equality is important, you know, feminism and women having more rights. And that's very, very important. But at the same time, I think some people, especially like in my case, guys who were playing soccer and me wanting to play soccer with them with the skills that I can, it's very, limiting for me and very startling for them to get in this atmosphere of, being a Gen Z and kind of taking in the factors and the changes that the society brings. I've heard many bad things about, you're a girl, why are you playing soccer, from like bad comments to swearing and a lot of controversial things because with the reason I'm a girl and because I can't participate in guys, like sports for guys, as a Korean, because Koreans have very traditional mindset of the differentiation with gender, like I've mentioned before, the separation of roles as women and men, it's been kind of a continuation of that in modern days as well. So because I went to Korean school where international school is a bit more open, so Chadwick has girls soccer teams from kindergarten, if they want to high school girls. But for me, because I grew up in a traditionally Korean environment, yes, there's more girls playing soccer nowadays, and there's like even TV shows where women celebrities come on and they play soccer these days. But when I started playing soccer, or when I was in middle school, so that was like I was like 9, so like 2010, or like since then, it's been very, very hard for me to kind of engage in the new societal changes, and me having the new mindset of being more exposed in gender and equality and stuff. I was trying to focus and, push myself, even though I was getting hurt, to fit in this thoughts that I had as a Gen Z, girl growing up, pursuing what I want to do and what I'm good at, but at the same time, because there's the difference of gender, it kind of very limited me, because to be honest, I could have taken soccer as my career if I wanted to from a young age, if it wasn't for that difference in some aspects, if I was more like, if the society really took me in and swept me off my feet, and they were very generous about a girl playing soccer in Korea. I'm not saying that that's the case for international communities, or even in America, girls soccer has been a very, very famous sport, but for me in Korea especially, still to this day, women's soccer hasn't been as developed as much compared to other countries, even though it's getting bigger. So in that scenario, I think the difference and the perspective of Gen Z, and just in general how we're trying to push ourselves to, there's social media and a lot of more connections to the international world these days, and I think that's kind of technology does a big factor on moving Koreans, or like people in general in traditional mindsets, or to exposing them to a new world. But at the same time, it is still a struggle that people are struggling to kind of cope with the changes, especially individual cases like mine. So yeah, that's one thing different.
Is there another world where I would be talking to you about your career as an international football player instead of history? I mean, do you feel like that? Do you feel like there was this thing that you could or would have achieved, but not for society kind of pushing you, or you don't, it's not like that? I'm just...
there was a lot of factors why I didn't choose soccer as my career when I was young, but it is true that when I was in 5th grade and 6th grade, my dream, even though I was studying history, my dream was to be a professional soccer player. And then when I went to school and I played soccer with the boys, they were like, even though they could evidently see I was sometimes better than them, not saying all the time, but my skill level was acceptable, but they still was discriminating against me. And those like pressure maybe kind of drew me away. And there were certain times in my middle school life, people are going through puberty and everyone's sensitive, but at the same time I was really, really severely hurt by the things people said. And even because the guy's impression of a girl playing soccer is like that, they actually influence the other girls to see me in a different way. Oh, she's the girl that plays soccer. Oh, why would she play soccer? Just, hang out with us like normal girls. And the concept of normal and not kind of, Gen Z is all about, diversity and coping with different people and different culture. But at the same time, because those traditional mindsets were there, I think in that sense, the diversity was a little bit less diverse, I guess, in some aspects. Yeah.
So it's like you're too girly for the boys and you're too masculine for the girls. You get caught in between them. Yeah. You mentioned that there was a difference perhaps between the 8 years or whatever it was of Korean education that you did compared to Chadwick International School. What's the difference? What's like Korean education, normal regular Korean education, if there is such a thing, is either the best thing in the world or it's the worst thing in the world, because it's so stressful, it's so competitive, there's study from morning till night, it's rote memorization, or everyone's literate, everyone's pretty smart, they can do great math, there's not too much sort of drugs and guns problems, so it's either the best or the worst. What is it really like?
I don't know about Chadwick International as an education system, because it follows the IB curriculum and the MYP, PYP curriculum. So what I have experienced in Chadwick, going to the last year, the 5th year of MYP, which is an education system that was originated from Europe, and the IB diploma program that I'm doing right now, it's very different in the sense, like you've mentioned, that Korean school is all about memorization. And at the same time that it works, getting knowledge into students' brains and having people be more educated, it doesn't work as the same as MYP or IB, in the sense that, okay, I guess I'm a little bit biased that I like MYP or IB education systems more, but at the same time, I think there's a difference where IB now kind of forces like emphasizes the production of knowledge or the use of knowledge, because knowledge can be accessible to everyone if you have a laptop, or it's the accessibility of knowledge is very more convenient to compare back to like before. But Korean education just emphasizes on knowing, but IB more implements that into usage of education in real life situations, or you know, how you process the knowledge into your individual case, or a global mindset that you might have in order to taking care of a global issue, or engaging in the international world. And I think that's the main difference between Korean education system and international education system. And to improve that, the Korean government is doing a lot of work, and I'm aware because they're having like students choose courses on their interests, and they're having people more engaged. They're doing a lot of extracurricular programs. And whereas it was only about like suning the KSAT or the grades that you get, nowadays, I mean, because of Corona, it's been a little bit out of focus, but a lot of the times it was about volunteer hours. Like you needed to get about 20 hours of volunteering time during middle school and high school for sure every year, to, you know, get a point to go to high school, or you know, these extracurricular activities, or the school would give awards for, you know, not just talent about studying, like, but like you know, writing essays, or drawing, or, you know, sciences and stuff. And I really admire the constant effort that the Korean education systems are putting in. But in order to change and move through to like to get to a bigger international stage like the IB system, it requires time and effort and money. So yeah, but really big difference is that knowledge, the memorization, and the flatness of education, of how they deal with knowledge itself, kind of shapes the Korean students in my aspect of what I experienced, taking them to a very close-mindedness compared to thinking about others or respecting others, and just what it would feel like living in an international world as, you know, technology is being developed. You know, country borders are not really existent anymore in the social network. So yeah, in that sense, I think there's a big difference. Yeah.
How did you survive? It sounds like your outlook on life, what you want, what you value in terms of identity, in terms of national borders, in terms of morality or opinions. You said that the Korean education system is changing, but I mean, you were in there for like 8 years. How did you survive? What were the challenges? What were the process? Because you seem pretty positive today. Was it you got through it, I guess?
Yeah. Actually, I really had a tough time during elementary school and middle school. I went to Korean school until the first semester of high school. So until 2020, June, I went to Korean school for 8 years, and it was very different. I had a lot of problems blending in with my peers, and I can't really necessarily say that that was a bad thing, because I knew how to, you know, sometimes cut corners or be flexible, or deal with certain conflicts that I had in life that I'm going to need to learn in the future in the society, to have like a nice life. But at the same time, I think it was very hard for me to blend in terms of culture and language, because like I've said, you know, coming back, I wasn't really accepted for the person that I was. And I wouldn't say necessarily an identity crisis because I'm not, you know, foreign. I don't have dual citizenship. I'm 100% Korean. But the mindset that I had in my head, I always thought I needed to work hard to get to a place where I can feel confident about myself and where I can actually study in English and do what I wanted to do. So, I mean, yes, I was studying history and it's very big part of me in middle school since I started giving tours and stuff. But one of the other reasons why I loved giving tours so much was because I could connect with foreigners. That was really the only place that I can meet foreign people because Korea is very highly populated with Koreans. It's not very diverse in terms of nationality or race. So it was the only outlook for myself. It was my only escape place to not be Korean. Like, as weird as that sounds, and as much as I love Korean culture and history and being Korean myself, I wanted to get to a place where I wanted to feel the international setup. And actually, it's very hard for Koreans with Korean nationality to get into international school as you get older and older. And considering that I got into Chadwick in 10th grade, I think it reflects the hard work that I put in order to wanting to fulfill and establish being comfortable about myself and being in an environment. And I know Chadwick also is a very highly Korean populated international school, but compared to Korean traditional high school, it's a very international place that at least I have people that went through similar things, like talking in 2 languages. And I think being in that closed traditional Korean school since I was young, during puberty for everyone, that certainly didn't help. But that experience kind of gave me a more insight of how diverse people is, reading what the other person might think and how I needed to act in order to respect someone or to get my thoughts across. Or sometimes, like, because I had those adversities in my life during middle school, I think that's how I was able to blend in well when I came to international schools, even though I've never studied in English because first grade and second grade doesn't really count in studying, but I was able to get the hang of it really fast compared to other people. When I came into international school, I was able to make friends with foreign people as well, which is a very big hardship when it comes to the separation of Korean people and international people, or like any other international school in any other country. That's really hard. But because I had those experiences, I was able to blend in a case. I am blending in international school right now, which was actually my goal, to find something that I feel comfortable with. And now with my goal of going to college or university in America or any other country other than Korea, to feel more international and putting myself in the international stage, like I'm trying to put Korean history, I think in that sense, I was able to, because I had those experiences and that because I knew those differences, I got to know more about Korea itself and what I needed to bring onto the international world to make Korean, either that's Korean history or myself, more, for people to be more knowledgeable about it. Yeah.
I get the feeling that by leaving Korean education and going to international education, you were able, or even sort of talking to foreigners and such forth, you were able to be yourself more. You're able to be K or something, and rather than acting in society or something. That's what I get a lot of. You said that you voted in the last election, okay? Now, for a lot of people outside of Korea that understand Korea through social media or through English language articles and things like that, Korea in your generation is divided heavily amongst gender.
Yeah.
Is that right? Do you? I know this is a very controversial subject. You don't have to go into it if you don't want to, but like, what is it like in terms of the male and female population in Korea amongst people your age? Is it just one of these natural teething problems, or no, there's serious fundamental issues to be resolved? It affected your voting, it didn't affect your voting. How does that play out, Kay?
I haven't really thought about this specific topic. I think Sehun's very interested in politics and what's happening nowadays. But for me, I just think that what really matters is actually being knowledgeable that there is that difference. Actually knowing that there's something that we need to like work for. And I don't really, I'm not as knowledgeable, I guess, as much as Sehun or anybody else that about like what's going on in the political world. Or I was just fascinated to, I can vote now. I'm an adult, but I think just knowing that it exists and having awareness, like spreading awareness to like other social issues, that's what matters. Yeah.
No, I agree with you. Yeah. Is there any message that you would like to give to the listeners about the real life experiences of young people in Korea? So it doesn't have to be political, but some people did say that it was interesting to hear from young people, because normally we only hear from professors or celebrities or things like that. So that's part of this effort that I'm doing. Is there anything that you want to say about the real life experiences of young people in Korea?
I think, at least for me, young people, I think people my age might feel a very pressured right now, especially if they go to Korean school or anywhere in the world. You're very pressured with the thought that I have to do well. Yeah. I have to do better whether that's in life or colleges or studying or if you're doing a sport like sport. But I think that they're very pressured because the quality of life is getting higher and higher, especially for Koreans. And like we've seen in the past 20 years, it's been very, very different. It changes a lot. And Korea is very sensitive to change, like social media or like any other platform in the world is. And I feel like people my age might think that there's a lot of change going on, and we need to adapt to that, and we need to also cope with the pressure, whether that's parents or my expectations, or to do well in those changes, and we have to be fluent. And I think that's one of the things that people are aware of. And I think that's why I love the book The Power of Nunchi, and it kind of talks about how Koreans have built life from nunchi. And I think being a Korean and having that nunchi, and as a young generation going through these changes, we have to utilize nunchi in order to be successful or match expectations that people have, or drive Korea to those situations. And now I'm very fortunate to find my interest in a very young age, but a lot of people are not knowledgeable of what they want to do in the future. And for me also, I know that I like history, and I know that I want to pursue in international relations, but at the same time, I don't know what I want to be specifically. And knowing that there's that uncertainty in, as a young generation, you have that uncertainty of what you don't know what's going to happen in life, and having to go through those changes, I think, is one of the aspects that people are aware of, which I want to mention. Yeah.
I think we've got this, the Polish sociologist Zygmunt Bauman, he wrote this book he had this idea called liquid modernity. But one of the ideas of that, the basic idea, was that we tell young people these days, be yourself, do what you want. But that's really hard. That's actually worse, because sometimes we're meant to be giving guidance and values and instruction, and not telling them what to do, but giving them some kind of choices or options or structure. But just saying be yourself is like, oh my God, it's a really suffocating actually thing for people.
Yeah, definitely.
You mentioned excuse me, The Power of Nunchi, which is Eunhyun's book, I believe, if my memory serves. What's the secret? What is how do give us the nunchi 101, Kay, while you're here?
Well, I've read in the book, and I had a lot of aha moments while reading the book. And I realized Koreans are one of the very few people who get scolded by their parents because you don't have nunchi. I've heard a lot from my mom. They're like, can you have more nunchi? You need to use your nunchi in these situations. Yeah. I think nunchi can be developed as you learn. And I learned going through my middle school or elementary school experiences with the conflicts with my peers. I think that's the most influential thing that happened for me. But I would just say, you know, bumping in and, you know, stumbling along the way. Kind of in the book, it says sensing what you feel like, and speed is important. And I think speed will come along as long as you know, proceed, like progress through. But just being aware and trying to empathize and trying to be aware of what you're surrounded by is really the key point, and trying to think, putting yourself in the other person's boots. I think that's really what nunchi is all about, and respecting others. Yeah.
No, it's it's got to be quick, and you're right. People do scold about that kind of thing. It comes out, and for me, the idea of nunchi is I always have to quickly work out in a social situation whether I'm number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. Because as a professor or as a media person, sometimes I'm number 1. But then when I meet other people, I might be number 4 or 5. So sometimes I have to be super quiet and just shut up. And other times I have to lead, and it changes all the time. And nobody actually tells you. So you need to just, Kyungyeon, 뭐지? Nunchi reply. You need to just get it through your nunchi, don't you? That's it. That's it. No.
Yeah.
My nunchi's not bad. Just a couple more questions, Kay. We're trying to get this camera sorted. You've already done so much at such a young age. You've talked a little bit about going abroad for university, I think, or international relations.
Yeah.
What does the future hold for you? We've spoken so much about history. Just speak to me a little bit about the future.
Well, everything is uncertain, but I mean, the future is uncertain for everyone. But my goal right now is doing well in school, going abroad, hopefully the USA if I don't have any change in my heart, or you know, I would love to you know, adventure through foreign places. So put myself out there, know more about it. And I think as much as I love Korean history, I'm now getting to know more about world history, because I take IB higher level history course right now. So I'm just trying to ease into a new concept of history, and the differences. Korean history and IB history is very different, as much as world history. And I really like the way the teacher tries to shape my understanding of historiography and how I need to perceive history in those aspects, being objective or subjective at times. And that's just getting the hang of being exposed to different kinds of history, and taking that into international relations, which I hope to major in. I'm not sure yet, but in using history as a language to cooperate with other people, or different nationalities, or you know, just putting myself in that international stage where I can engage with a lot of people, you know, looking for diversity, and as much as I can you know, settle into change and blend in, I want to do that in a bigger stage, I guess. So that's what I want to do now.
It sounds fascinating that you already have those goals, and also you know, you mentioned you had teachers providing you guidelines and how to study. That that's great. I hope you achieve it. The kind of historian international relations thinker Martin Wight, W-I-G-H-T, fascinating guy, because he brings the idea of history into international relations, which is sometimes very ahistorical. It's sometimes, you know, it's systemic realism, and it's just the structure of the international system and anarchy, and you know, it's very ahistoric. But Martin Wight does a lot of good stuff with that in the English school. Before, it's worth checking out. I highly. But the school of the theory school he's from is called the English school, and I always felt really bad like telling people, because I'm English, and it feels like, David, you just like that because you're English. And I'm like, no, I don't, honest. It's weird. It shouldn't be. I need to ask you this question. You spoke a bit about football. Sorry, soccer. Which, what is your team? Do you support a team, Kay? Is there a favorite team you have or player?
Well, I only watch Korean men and women's soccer and USA Women's Soccer League, so I don't think I have say in that.
Okay, I was just curious. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Last question then, Kaya, because have we missed anything, by the way? Just before we wrap this up, is there anything that we've missed or needs to be said?
No, I'm good.
No.
So far.
Excellent. So, the last question, Kay, is one that has been asked many times, but very simply, we're all in this world together. We didn't ask to be here, but thus we are here living. What should we be doing to make our lives better? What should we be doing to help lives of other people? What can we do to provide more rewarding experiences? What's the meaning of life, Kay?
Very, very abstract question. Where, I think based on our conversation and what I believe, maybe just being knowledgeable. Whether that's not being knowledgeable, like being book smart and street smart is different, but being knowledgeable that, for myself, being knowledgeable to not repeat the same mistakes again, like the purpose of what history is. Being knowledgeable, having awareness and respecting others, and being knowledgeable about your surroundings and what it's like and what you should take in action, whatever that is, in order to produce like a good outcome, whether that's for your peers or people around you, the environment, or yourself. I think that's really the key to have like being fulfilled in life. I guess you don't really have to have certain elements or being in a certain position to be happy, but I think as long as you're knowledgeable of what you have to do, what your purpose is, and what you are like where you're going at to, because life is really long and it's very big and there's a lot of things, so I think being knowledgeable in that sense of knowing yourself or what you desire, and for me in that case it's history right now, but I don't know what that's going to change into, but being knowledgeable in those instances, being knowledgeable of change, being knowledgeable of what needs my help, what I can contribute to, whether that's in the international stage or globally or locally, who needs my help. I think that's really what you should be aware of while you're living life. So yeah. Hope that's a okay answer.
No, any answer is okay, but you with all the books behind you, a tour guide since you were 11, studying history, be knowledgeable kind of fits the theme, I think, perfectly. Is there, no, I like it, Kay. Is all knowledge? Are there good? Is there good knowledge and bad knowledge? Are there right types of knowledge? Is it like, as long as you're getting stuff into you, it's all good? Or is there kind of like good knowledge and bad knowledge?
This sounds like my theory of knowledge class. I like it.
Okay.
But there's certain things that you shouldn't know, but it won't kill you, I hope. It really depends, but I think knowing what type of knowledge that you should be knowing, having the nunchi is also a part of the knowledge that you should be knowing, if that's okay. I hope I'm not answering the wrong question, but yeah, nunchi as a Korean, very, very useful. Yeah.
Go with your guts and what you should know. Yeah, I like it. It makes perfect sense. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
I'll cut it there. Boom. Okay, and now you can relax. We're all done.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you. It was great. You changed so much when you started talking about football.
Yeah.
It was amazing. I'm thinking when you were talking about it, like, I might cut this and put it at the beginning. Because you were so like, come on.
Yeah. Yeah, I love football. And You will be shocked. Like people can't recognize who I am when I'm on the field and compared to when I'm in school. Like, yeah, I'm that different. But I guess my second personality.
Keep doing it. Keep playing it. It's brilliant.